The Marvel Cinematic Universe is finally back to firing on all cylinders after the delay in releases that we saw over the last year due to that thing that I don't even want to mention. And one major source of awesomeness that we've seen pop up over the last few months has been the Disney Plus shows set within the larger universe. Something that we are getting more and more of almost constantly. One show that we found out we have to look forward to in the near future is Agatha, House of Harkness, a show centered around everyone's favorite part of WandaVision, Agatha Harkness, played to perfection by Kathryn Hahn. But we know pretty much nothing about the show, beyond the title that is. Which makes sense, since the series is a little ways off from release. However, that's what I'm here for. I'm gonna take a look at what we know about Agatha, not just within the MCU, but in the pages of the comics as well, to try to glean some idea about what this show could bring to the table, and how it could impact the MCU as a whole. From her comic origins to what genres the show could fit within, to how Agatha could save the very multiverse itself, let's go ahead and dive right into it. I should probably start this video out with a connection between Agatha and some pretty major characters within the Marvel Universe, since I'm sure that if I didn't bring this up, at least a few of you would leave some pretty choice words for me down in the comments. I can see you typing down there already. Just hold your horses there, champ. Comic fans, of course, already know what I'm talking about, which is her relationship with the Fantastic Four. On the page, Agatha actually made her big debut as part of the Fantastic Four series. She first appeared in issue number 94 in October 1969. At the time, Reed and Sue Richards had just had a son, Franklin, and were looking for someone to serve as a nanny of sorts for the young lad. Probably so that someone could look after him while they were busy gallivanting around the globe saving people. Makes sense, honestly. Now, Agatha at this point in her life had spent some time as a governess, but had retired a few years prior. However, once the Richards approached her about taking on the role of nanny for their little boy, Agatha took the gig, mainly due to who the child's parents were. And it's worth pointing out here that the Richards didn't have any idea that she was some kind of all-powerful witch at the time. They kind of figured she was just a kick-ass nanny. However, she pretty quickly proved quite the contrary. Due to a sort of strange and borderline convoluted set of events, the Fantastic Four soon found themselves trapped by the Frightful Four, who are kind of like an evil version of the team. Kind of, sort of, not really, but just go with me here. Seeing the team in danger, Agatha stepped up and faced down the evildoers. Obviously, they underestimated her, which, I mean, if you were a supervillain and an old lady stepped up to you, you'd probably not think anything of it either. However, she pretty quickly took them out, thanks in part to her cat Ebony, who helped out as well. That's pretty cool, but despite kicking just all of the butts, somehow she managed to keep the fact that she had mystical powers from the Fantastic Four, who didn't find out that she was an ancient spellcaster until quite a while later. And she went on to become a pretty close friend to the team. So much so that when a group of witches from New Salem kidnapped her, in hopes of punishing her for revealing her magical secret to people from the outside world, the team went in, guns a-blazing as it were, and helped her out. And yeah, she did continue to serve as nanny for young Franklin Richards, even after being revealed as a witch. Because, come on, would you fire the magically powered woman who has promised to protect your child? I certainly wouldn't. Now, we know that the Fantastic Four is slated to join the Marvel Cinematic Universe in the not-too-distant future, seemingly before the end of Phase 4 if Kevin Feige and co. are to be believed. So what if, before they get their own solo movie, Agatha, House of Harkness is where some of them make their debut? Maybe not necessarily the entire team, but I could certainly see Reed and Sue at least making a cameo on the show. Maybe as an end credits tease, setting up Agatha's return in said Fantastic Four movie. Now, how likely do I actually think this is going to happen? Honestly, it wouldn't surprise me if at least we got a tease of the team at some point. Given that Agatha's comic origins were in the pages of Fantastic Four, she is pretty solidly linked to them. And the series is called House of Harkness, and the events I described earlier with the Frightful Four and all that took place largely in her home. So, I don't know, maybe we'll get a serialized version of that story. You never know, Marvel's done some crazy things in the past, so why not? Something fun about all of the Disney Plus Marvel shows is that they have a lot more freedom to play with the MCU formula than the theatrically released entries. At least that's what we've sort of inferred from what we've seen so far. They have been surprisingly experimental so far, with WandaVision giving us sort of what an MCU-based sitcom might look like, and what if going straight up animated. So who's to say that Agatha House of Harkness isn't going to do some interesting things on its own? Maybe even play in some new genres that we wouldn't expect to see within the MCU otherwise. But what kinds of genres or ideas would fit with what we know of the show so far? Well, since we basically only have the title, the sky's the limit, but I should probably keep things limited to what we know about the title character at the very least. First up is one that I personally really want to see. A show built around horror. Back when Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness was first announced, word started spreading among fans that the movie might just be the first MCU-based horror movie. However, Kevin Feige pretty quickly squashed those rumors. That being said, the mere mention of a superhero horror movie stuck in fans' minds, which makes sense. It's certainly an intriguing concept, and House of Harkness might just be the right avenue for bringing this concept to life. Think about it here for a second. As a witch, Agatha has her feet firmly planted in the macabre, in the supernatural side of things. As such, she is the perfect character to bring in some of the monstrous beings that usually go hand in hand with characters such as witches within not just pop culture, but also folk tales and legends and such. Witches, as seen within most classical depictions, are often associated with the demonic, with devils and imps and the like. So imagine for a moment if Agatha were to escape the clutches of Wanda's mind-altering spell that she put on her at the end of WandaVision, and sought out the power of some great being in order to enact some form of revenge against the Scarlet Witch. Naturally, as is wont to do within fiction, this deal with the devil, as it were, backfires, plunging Agatha into a dark and terrifying set of circumstances that she must pull herself out of. Or maybe in order to get out of Wanda's spell in the first place, she must face down some literal and figurative demons. Just spitballing here. Could also be a way to introduce Mephisto into the MCU. Someone that people seem to be convinced is already there as is, so why not just go full bore with him? And heck, it could also be a solid way to bring vampires into the mix, setting things up for Blade in the near future. Either way, it could be absolutely fantastic, and a nice change of pace from the bog standard MCU routine. Speaking of routines, what if it were to go in the complete opposite direction, from being a horror to being a musical? Yeah, I argue that those two are probably opposites. Okay, so this idea is one that doesn't really have any evidence pointing to it, but then again, not a lot of these do, I'll admit, but roll with me here. Let's do a little thought experiment. All of you watching this right now, blank out your minds. Get all of your thoughts out of there. For some of you, this will be pretty easy. Now, when I bring up WandaVision, what's the first thing that pops into your head? It's been Agatha all along. That's right, I am willing to bet that the first thing a lot of, if not the majority of you thought of, was a musical number. Which makes sense in fairness, it is a bop. But what if Marvel were to look at the popularity of that song when the episode came out and decide to steer into it hard, making the series based around the character from that song into a full-blown musical? It's not the craziest idea out there if I'm being honest. Here's how I'd say it goes down. With Agatha under the control of Wanda's spell, maybe the show should shift to Agatha, or rather Agnes's, point of view as she makes her way through life in modern Westview. And since her subconscious mind is probably aware that things are not right, she starts to see things in terms of a musical. Songs, dances, the whole shebang. As she starts to put things together and ultimately break Wanda's holdover. Would play really well with the idea of House of Harkness being a sort of pseudo-sequel series to WandaVision. Whereas that show told a story through the lenses of different eras of television sitcoms, House of Harkness could explore different genres of musicals. Maybe one episode would be your classic Broadway musical, something akin to Rent or West Side Story. Then the next shifts to a rock opera, then the following one jumps to something a little bit more classically operatic, so on and so forth. Could be a ton of fun, for not just audiences, but also for the cast and crew working on the production. However, you know what genre I think we would be most likely to see out of the show if we are actually going to get something besides your typical Marvel fare? A period piece. Agatha as a character has a ton of backstory that is ripe for exploration. Her comic counterpart is ancient, being old enough to recall life circa 500 years before the sinking of Atlantis. So there is a lot that can be done with her past. However, if I had to venture a guess, if we're gonna see anything from her past, it'll be something to do with the Salem witch trials. Back in the 17th century, Firestar, a member of the X-Men, traveled back in time and found herself in a bit of a conundrum. See, because of her mutant ability, some of the Puritan members of the city of Salem, Massachusetts, thought that she was a witch, understandably. They then tried to burn her at the stake, only for Agatha to intervene, saving her. See, at the time, Agatha was a resident of Salem, where she had formed her own small coven of witches, hidden from the eyes of the other locals. Agatha revealed to Firestar that she was actually in support of the witch trials, as she believed that they would lead to the strengthening of magical people overall, even going so far as to basically sacrifice some members of her coven, hoping to cull the weak from their ranks. Yeah, even the comic version of Agatha isn't exactly a great person, despite the fact that she is arguably a quote-unquote good guy on the page. Now, in WandaVision, we kinda got a hint at what Agatha was doing back in the Pilgrim days, with that one flashback where we saw that she single-handedly murked her entire coven after they tried to burn her alive. So needless to say, it looks like the MCU version of Agatha is a bit more focused on personal power than the growth of magic users as a whole. But what if we got the story of how she became that self-centered? How she went from a novice magic user to the all-powerful, magic-absorbing beast that we saw in WandaVision? Could be where the House of Harkness title comes from as well, as it would theoretically explore her relationship with her family, more specifically, her mother. It's just a thought. Now okay, let's be honest with ourselves. More than likely, House of Harkness is going to be along the lines of a more normal Marvel outing, which is fine, I wouldn't complain, but if that is to be the case, what could this show bring to the table? Well, looking at the way things are going within the MCU in Phase 4, I'd probably imagine that it would expand upon the concept of the multiverse. Yep, we've reached that point in the video where I talk about the buzzword that many of you might be sick of talking about at this point, as I know that pretty much everyone and their dog has thrown out a billion different multiverse theories and discussions and the like, but it's kind of the big thread tying things together right now, so I gotta bring it up at least a little bit. While it might not seem like Agatha is all that connected to the idea of the multiverse based upon what we know about her from WandaVision, on the page, her comic counterpart has had some dealings with other dimensions. In fact, some major parts of her power set directly deal with dimension manipulation, something that could come into play as the multiverse plays a larger and larger role in the future of the MCU. For starters, Agatha can create portals between dimensions. Now, this might not sound like anything all that fancy. We've seen that sorcerers like Doctor Strange can do this kind of thing. However, she is able to do way more than just travel to different Earths. She can straight up change their very shape. Agatha has shown that she is capable of some fairly complex dimensional manipulation. For example, she has on at least one occasion transported the entire town of New Salem between dimensions. So assuming that she doesn't play a major role within Multiverse of Madness, which is seeming more and more likely the more we learn about the plot of that movie, what could she do within her show that would impact the multiverse? Well, honestly, I think the answer lies with that town that I just mentioned, New Salem. For those of you who don't know what that is, New Salem is a secret town completely inhabited by witches, warlocks, wizards, and other magic-based creatures, hidden away in Colorado. It was founded by Agatha sometime after the end of the Salem witch trials, as Firestar had convinced her to take her coven somewhere else, away from the Puritans who sought to destroy them, rather than her original plan of weeding out the weak by letting them get turned to ash. As a bastion of magical power, this place is home to Salem 7, a group of magical mutants who wield unbelievably vast amounts of power. All of whom, by the way, are technically the grandchildren of Agatha. So what if these 7, in an attempt to get to Agatha, whether to save her from Wanda's spell or to get revenge against her for some unknown slight, start messing with the multiverse, and Agatha must rise up to fix things herself? Or perhaps she's called upon to help save the city of New Salem from some outsiders, and so she must use her powers to transport it to a different dimension. Yet again, this is largely just a shot in the dark, but it's a possibility. And like I mentioned earlier, if the show deals with members of Agatha's extended family, as this idea would, then the House of Harkness title becomes just a little bit more appropriate. Either way, I would not be surprised if Agatha House of Harkness winds up being a major plot point in Phase 4.